Welcoming you back to News Talk. This is a wildly busy and we should say fascinating time on Capitol Hill. Unless lawmakers approve another stopgap funding bill in the next few hours, federal agencies will run out of money, and they will do so tomorrow. And in the House, a leadership scramble is on the GOP side, prompted by the surprise resignation of Speaker John Boehner. Benton Ives is congressional editor for Politico and joins us now with more on all of this. Great having you here because, as I say, this is a wild and woolly time. Let's talk about the shutdown showdown first. The resignation, the statement from John Boehner that he would depart his speakership and his seat at the end of October, in about a month's time, was followed almost immediately by this sense that a stopgap spending bill to take us through December was a near certainty. Is that your understanding?
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think Speaker Boehner's resignation basically took the air out of the shutdown balloon, if you will. There was a lot of agitation from his right flank in the House. They were upset that, Boehner was probably going to have to move forward with a clean funding bill, if you will, that it wouldn't include a policy rider to defund Planned Parenthood, as many conservatives would like. That all changed when he resigned. So now he's sort of free to do what he wants in his last couple of days, and he's going to go ahead and put that clean bill on the floor and say, well, there's nothing you can do to me. You can't depose me. You can't threaten me anymore because I'm not going to be here.
And part of the dynamic here is his willingness to move something with Democratic votes. Up until his announcement of resignation, that was not something the GOP side wanted to do, but now the door is open?
I think it's perhaps a little more complicated than that. In truth, over the past 5 years, when it's really come down to brass tacks, if you will, Boehner has had to rely on a handful of Democratic votes to get across key legislation, including a lot of spending law over the last couple of years. So it's not a new thing. I think that his members were getting really tired of that. And so, again, now that he is free from any future repercussions, he's not going to be here. It's somebody else's problem next year, or certainly after October, dealing with the House conference. Now he can say, well, I'll get a few Dems, we'll pass this, we'll avoid a shutdown, and everything will be okay.
How can you tee up for us what we anticipate the fight to be in December? Could this be I think the public is weary. They don't attach a lot of importance to these looming deadlines because when we go over the abyss, well, I don't want to actually minimize the damage that the government shutdown has caused in the past. But in any event, is there a sense that we're facing an uncertain play out of events when the December deadline looms?
Yeah, I think it would be hard to overestimate the amount of turmoil there is on the Hill right now. You've got these sensitive deadlines coming up. You're right. Congress can break a few of these deadlines, can go through a few of them for a couple days or a few weeks. There's not going to be huge ramifications, although there are some real-world repercussions. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, let's say if the nation were to breach the debt limit, which will be coming up sometime in the next couple of months, we don't know exactly when, there's some thought that could have real, tangible, immediate effects on financial markets and therefore average Americans. With GOP leadership in the House really up in the air, with the debt limit vote coming sometime soon, we don't know what's going to happen. There's some thought that maybe Boehner will try to move some of these deadlines further past just December, as sort of a parting gift to the party, if you will, or at least a moderate.
Or to the nation.
Yeah, perhaps. Some might view it that way. Getting that done is going to be very difficult. Conservatives really are unhappy with current debt levels and with government spending.
Could we see a highway bill with long-term funding, a real bill?
I think that that's certainly the hope for a lot of moderates in both parties. I think it's going to be very difficult. I think it's going to be very difficult in the next couple of weeks.
Because of the funding piece? Where the money?
Yeah, because of the cost. The highway bill is not cheap. This is several $1 trillion when you're all said and done. That's over the long term. Boehner can do a lot on his way out the door, but I don't know that he can get all the way there. I think that's going to wait till the end of the year for really a pretty giant wrap-up.
Can you talk about the sense that Republican leadership in Washington either, or maybe both, either isn't conservative enough or hasn't fought hard enough in general and against the president in particular to achieve GOP and conservative goals? Because that's a palpable part of the moment that we're in, it seems.
Right. I think that's For me, that's a very difficult question to parse. On the one hand, yes, I think you cannot underestimate how upset the conservative base is out there in the nation, if you will. There are districts out there who have sent members to Congress with the express task of, I want you to really reduce the size of government. That's not happened. We've really sort of trimmed around the edges, but, there have been no large-scale changes. That's going to be very upsetting to a base voter, and I think we should be sympathetic to that. On the other hand, you do have a Democrat in the White House, and you do have Democrats in the Senate, and enough Democrats in the Senate that you can't do everything you want. So the GOP has not done a good job explaining, I think, to their base, the politics of the possible, as opposed to, you start with your ideal, and then you work your way back to what you can get done. And that's been Boehner's problem all along. He's been unable to convince enough of his members that, hey, this is really the best deal I can get in the tangible world.
And given his conservative bona fides, it seems, and I'm outside the system, you're much closer to it as someone who covers it day to day, it seems to anger him, and perhaps understandably so, that he's been criticized in this manner. I'm sure we're all open to criticism when it's deserved, but for him to be criticized for this seems galling, if I can say that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the right word. I mean, here's a guy who has committed his life effectively to the Republican Party. Despite what some folks may say about him, he's not a Democrat. I would say he's probably even a rock-ribbed conservative. I'd note that he came to Congress riding one of these sort of Republican revolutions. He was a revolutionary himself. In fact, he was exiled from leadership for an attempted usurpation several years ago. So for him to be accused of, being someone who's not tough enough on Democrats and not a real conservative, I think that's got to be very frustrating, and perhaps was one of the reasons that he'd had enough and quit.
Is Kevin McCarthy at this point a 99% favorite to be the next speaker?
I wouldn't put it that high.
You would not?
No, I think he's clearly the front runner, but there is a cadre of conservatives in the House that are looking to delay the leadership elections as long as they can. Notably, this morning, Boehner did not set a time for those elections. We thought that he would, that it would be in a couple days. They're going to delay it. Now, maybe 5 days, in which case I think McCarthy's going to look pretty good. If it's a couple weeks, though, that's a sign that it's not 99%. It's 70, 75, 80. I don't know. It's pretty tumultuous up there right now.
Can you give us the little, what was it, the baseball card synopsis of Kevin McCarthy? John Boehner, well known. Kevin McCarthy, known on the Hill, but out in the land, probably not so much.
I think you've hit the first takeaway point. Here's a guy who's just not been around that long. What is he, 8 or 9 years in the House total? I mean, he's, by congressional standards, rocketed through leadership. I mean, he's risen from basically an unknown to one of the senior-most members of the House. Now he's on the verge of one of the most powerful positions in the United States. His rep is that he's very good politicking. He has a good understanding of his members. He has a good understanding of what needs to get done to get things done, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Notably, when there was a lot of restive conservatives in the House earlier, he backed a repeal of the Ex-Im Bank. I think correctly sensing which way the winds were blowing and perhaps looking forward to the future. But one of the big things about McCarthy is, at some level, he's kind of a question mark relative to someone like John Boehner, who's a lifer.
We only have about 30 seconds left. A guest that we had on last week made the point that, and others have said this too, that Boehner's staff is really good. Some of them may be looking for jobs off the Hill now, but to the extent that some of them should be nailed down because of what they bring to the table, that's part of the behind the scenes of this as well, right? Absolutely. You're going to see some really senior people leaving along with Boehner, and they're going to be heading out to K Street and looking for work would be my expectation. Benton Ives, congressional editor for Politico. Great having you here. So much going on. We really appreciate your time. My pleasure. Thank you. We'll step aside here. We are back with a program note right after this.